Welcome to the Professionals of the Inland Empire show with your host, John Tulac.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Professionals of the Inland Empire, affectionately known as PI. I'm John Tulac. I've been your host of all these podcast episodes. And each week we've been featuring usually two guests, sometimes one guest, who's a professional in a variety of fields like law, accounting, banking, marketing, who live and work in the Inland Empire. These are people in your community who can provide services to your small, medium, or large business, and they're right nearby. They're right in your backyard. And that's why we've been doing this podcast, to bring attention to the amazing talent that is in our area here in the Inland Empire. By working with each other, by collaborating, we help the Inland Empire economic development. We help the Inland Empire grow. So today, it's going to be a little bit different format. And we have one very, very special guest, a man that I've worked with on the radio and in some other settings, someone who is a really, really smart guy. He's an economist, and it might be a little bit dangerous putting an economist and a lawyer together in the same room, even if it is a virtual room, but that's what we're going to do today. So I'd like to welcome to the show Mr. Jay Prag, who is a clinical professor of economics at the Drucker School of Management in Claremont, and part of the Claremont Colleges, where he's been since 1986. He's also taught at Harvey Mudd College, Claremont McKenna College, and Pomona College. And over the course of his teaching career, he's gotten over 35 teaching awards, including Faculty of the Year multiple times. He is a guy who knows what he's talking about and knows how to deliver that content to his audience, which has been mostly students, but also on radio serving the general public. He's also an author of a book, several books actually, about economics, and most recently, along with his wife, he authored a book called Useful Game Theory. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a moment. But welcome to the show, Jay Prag.
Thank you, John. Good to see you here. I've been hearing nothing but good things about your podcast, and looking forward to having time to do this with you and talk about the Inland Empire. I've done things with you in other venues, helping local professionals in many, many ways. I almost bristle at being introduced as a professor, even though that is where the paycheck comes from, because I actually very much enjoy just talking to people and hearing about their businesses and sometimes their problems. And as you know, many times I just help out for free, just to be engaged in the community. A lot of talks around the Inland Empire and San Bernardino and Fontana and boards of directors, volunteer work like that. So it's fun to be an academic, but an academic who very much feels like I'm going to say this, it's going to sound weird, a normal human being.
Well, you certainly have a pulse on the economy, both local and nationally, and a real feel for business and making good decisions in business. I should mention that Jay and I have collaborated together numerous times on the Lou Desmond and Company show, where we're the regular guests on Thursdays during the week on 1490 AM at 5 o'clock with Lou. But when Lou is on the road, able to host that evening, it's been the John and Jay show, or really more the Jay and John show, where we just talk about whatever we want to talk about. And yeah, that's just got a lot of fun because there's, of course, as you know, Jay, a difference between being an expert and a pundit. And at least on the show, sometimes we can just kind of let her rip about opinions we have about just about anything we want to talk about. That's a whole lot of fun. But today, we're going to talk about something we know something about. And so let's get into the notion of game theory. And why don't you start us off with what you wanted to call the book, but the publisher wouldn't let you, and then why that's important.
Okay. So as John mentioned, I kind of got on a little roll publishing books over the last, going back almost 10 years now. And I had just finished my fourth book, which was a little piece that I wrote about COVID and business and how people should have learned lessons from the lockdown time and work at home and all sorts of stuff. So putting the school that I teach in is an MBA school. So putting all of my MBA skills to work writing that book. So I'd literally just finished my COVID book, and I got an email from a very big, famous publishing company back east. Um, and the person said they were the acquisitions editor, and they'd see my name out there a lot. And did I have any other content that I would like to be considered? And this isn't how that normally works, but when we make hay while the sun shines, then that expression will make more sense here in a second. So I wrote back and said, well, I had an idea in the shower this morning. True story. One of the classes that I teach in Claremont at the undergrad schools, but at the Drucker School, is called game theory. And game theory, in many people's hands, is a very mathematical class. I teach it as a very humanist class, a decision-making class that very much revolves around understanding the people involved and very little math. And I said, I've been teaching it for many years, and I don't really use a textbook. Um, and I think people learn this as they grow up when they get advice from their teachers and their parents and their spiritual advisors and their grandmother. I said, all of the little aphorisms and expressions and things that you learn from your grandmother actually relate to game theory situations, and in some cases are solutions or approaches or cautionary tales or things like that. So again, this is all in an email response to a publisher, said, I want to write a book called Granny New Game Theory. Granny as in your grandmother, right? And I pitched it. She said, I've never heard of anything like that. Do you think you could write that book? And I said, I'm pretty sure I could. And you have to send it out and to other authors, and they say thumbs up or thumbs down, and everybody thought it was a great idea. So I wrote this book. My wife and I wrote it. I always say that I write fast and she writes well. But she's got a PhD in strategy from UC Riverside and knows a lot of game theory. So I wrote fast and she wrote well, and we wrote this book, which we assumed was going to be called Granny New Game Theory. And when we finished, and again, the reviewers are all thumbs up, et cetera, the publisher, and we're having this meeting, said, what do you want to call it? And we were on a Zoom thing, and we looked at each other and said, it's called Granny New Game Theory. And she said, yeah, no, we're not going to publish a book called that. And I said, what are you talking about? That's the name of the book. And she said, we're a big famous East Coast publishing company. We're not going to, that's too, corny. And so we were a little crestfallen, and we went around and around, and we ended up with useful game theory, because the idea is it's very light on math and very heavy on storytelling, and it would make game theory a much more useful and interesting skill set for anybody who read it. But it's a little sad, because I did have this image of the book revolving around Granny and game theory, and interesting ideas for what should be, on the front of the book, and it ended up being called Useful Game Theory and looking a little bit like a textbook. So the first expression that I want to mention to you, John, is the one that Granny used to say, where she said, don't judge a book by its cover, because this is a really interesting book, even if the cover isn't quite as good as I had hoped.
That's kind of a fun way of getting to the substantive thing that we're going to talk about in just a moment. Going through this process and making assumption, I pitched a book with a particular title and they loved it, and then they reject the title at the end, but it kind of negates the whole idea of the storytelling.
Can't make that up.
And humanizing game theory, which was something I really first got acquainted with back in high school in debate. And so, well, this is good stuff. And then
Right.
we learned it more studying econ in college, and it has certainly served me well as a lawyer.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
we,
let me.
everybody knows this stuff, except they don't know that
They
that
don't
it
know
means
that they know it. That's right. So I'm raising a child, a small child, and a lot of what's in the book is relates to game theory that I have to do all the time. So dealing with older parents and blah blah, and dealing with children. And one of the granny expressions that I have always used but never thought very hard about is cheaters never prosper. Okay? Most of us grew up hearing that, and you did something you shouldn't have, and Granny would have said cheaters never prosper. And you try and take these things to heart, but when you're a little kid, you don't even exactly know what some of these words mean, right? And that's a great expression in that the wording of it is critical to what Granny was trying to tell you. In games theory, you will often be better off if you take advantage of the situation, if you what we think of as cheat one time, right? So you don't play by the rules and you get more, in the end, take advantage of somebody else, et cetera, et cetera. And Granny isn't saying cheaters never do better. That's not what she's saying. She's saying cheaters never prosper. The idea here is, yes, you can do better in one game if you cheat, but in the long run, nobody's going to want to play with you again. Nobody will trust you again, and your outcomes will be worse for the rest of time until you prove that you're not a cheater. So Granny's not trying to tell you that cheating never makes you better off. It'd be silly to tell a child that. They see kids but cutting in line who get there first, right? But eventually something happens to that kid, or nobody wants to be around them and they don't have friends, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea of the Granny book is you lean heavily on the words that Granny was telling you and think about what's the situation, um, what's its relevance, et cetera. And that was a really good one to sit back. I would wake up at 5 in the morning and have my morning coffee and have an expression pop in my head. And I'd write 2 pages on it, on the what academics would call unpacking the expression.
I can think of two examples that are business related, and one a little more universal than even that. But slash and burn agriculture can feed you for a while, but then you deplete the land. You have to move on, and businesses who treat vendors and customers that way soon find that there are very few vendors who want to work with them anymore, and very few customers who want to buy. So your gains from that way of doing business are very short-lived. And in mediation, when I was teaching mediation, there was a game that I used, and it was like a little bit like poker. There was a fixed pot, and you could play your hand in a collaborative way, which would maximize keeping the pot and share it. Or you could play for yourself, which each time that you got a bit of the pot, but the pot diminished. And each time, and I was doing this with lawyers, teaching lawyers, and each time lawyers, litigators, type A personalities would take some of the pot, and we'd have 5 rounds. And each time I would demonstrate by being collaborative. In the final round, where there's still a bit of pot left, there's about half the pot left for the final round, the other 3 to 5 lawyers would all finally collaborate, but I went the other way and took the rest of the pot. And they're outraged. And say, why did you do that? You were telling, yeah, I told you 4 times to do this, and you wouldn't listen. The only way you're going to remember this is if I took the rest of the pot.
Wow.
And that's how you make a lesson stick.
Yeah. Well, and it's a version of the very famous game called The Prisoner's Dilemma, where
Exactly.
not knowing for sure what other people are going to do, you often act self-interestedly. And that makes everybody worse off in the long run, but you're trying to avoid an outcome that's even worse if you are cooperative and other people are self-interested in things. And we teach this game a lot. It's a very important game. The Prisoner's Dilemma game is one that leads to cooperation in society when you raise people by what we call the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have others do unto you, which works out great in a community with neighbors, and you're all going to churches together and schools together, and you're going to see each other, and you're a little embarrassed if you are self-interested. Um, you get into situations where the golden rule starts to make sense. Actually, I can dovetail the golden rule with another Granny expression: "Two wrongs don't make a right." So my neighborhood, everybody has dogs, and we're all very good about when we walk our dog cleaning up after our dog, right? I mean, even if it's somebody else's front yard. And there's a rule about it, but that's not why you do it. you do it because it's your dog and it's your dog's output, and the right thing to do is that. And if people don't do that, the neighborhood doesn't smell very good, right? So you do it not because of the rule, you do it because it's the right thing to do. But again, you also learn that if you see a neighbor letting their dog do something in your front yard and not cleaning it up, it doesn't make it better for you to go let your dog mess up their front yard. All you end up with is a couple of messed up front yards. It's a process that doesn't it doesn't converge, right? So two
And
wrong
an escalating neighbor dispute.
Correct. Two wrongs don't make a right. Granny told you that. Now she didn't exactly tell you how to fix this, but she was right in that sense that doing something repeatedly that's self-interested back and forth to each other never turns out well. By the way, in your poker game, you did the right thing in taking the pot in the last period because there's no cooperation in the last period. I mean, the nature of most games is if you know it's the last period, you're probably not going to worry too much about what comes next. You're going for the gusto, which is why we build up society with things like family values and heaven and hell that last forever and things like that, right? Now, last periods are a real problem in game theory.
Yeah, when you know it's the last, then it does alter your behavior. Of course, we're teaching mediation where we're encouraging collaboration at every level until you have reached impasse, and then if there is impasse, if you've had somebody trying to help you, you ask for a mediator's proposal kind of thing. It's like
Sure,
the mediator is not going to let you out of the room unless really satisfied, there's nothing more that can be done.
sure.
And too many people give up too soon. At least that's been my experience as both an advocate for a party and as a mediator of well over 300 cases.
Yeah.
This is a situation where you're in a safe environment to be candid with one another and to try and work things out. But the lawyers in particular are resistant to mediation techniques because they're
Yeah.
used to fighting about everything.
Well, and one of the probably the single hardest thing about doing game theory. So game theory situations are any situation where you and another person are making choices and the outcome depends on both of your choices, right? And it happens in families, it happens every minute of your life, frankly. It's all the time. And you always have to process, well, what are the choices? What are the rules? What are the outcomes? Just like that, right? And you do it so frequently that you don't even think you're doing game theory. And the hardest ones are when you're making choices with a stranger. You just literally don't know what makes them tick. And you have to make choices fairly quickly. And often your choices are based on familiarity, on what a person looks like, all the things you were told not to pay attention to, and don't judge a book by its cover, because you have to use something, and that doesn't always go well. I mean, you sometimes use prejudices and other things that take you down paths that you could have done a lot better. But they're the hardest games, is the ones where you just have no way of knowing what's making the other player tick and how their choice processes are working and things like that.
And that is true, especially with strangers or relative strangers, like in business, you're at arm's length. But it's particularly painful in a family setting where you, for some reason or another, you have no idea what's making the other person tick in that particular direction away at the time.
Yep.
It's like, what do I do?
Yeah, yeah. So John, I think if we were on the radio show and we sometimes take things into a topical space, often a political space or something like that, the one that's on my mind now, because it's a good application of the expression and game theory, not because of one side or the other, is the two wrongs don't make a right, and the California proposition to redistrict to balance the playing field vis-a-vis Texas and all that stuff. And I'm watching these commercials all the time, and they're very the pro redistricting commercials, and they're very self-righteous, and they're very we have to do this to stand up to Trump and to stand up to Texas and all these other things. And regardless of how you feel about the arguments, it's two wrongs don't make a right 101. It's undoing a set of rules which were so important to California at the time that they put them in the Constitution, um, because they didn't want to, in effect, disenfranchise the minority party, whoever that is, because again, that has changed over the years. I moved to California during a fairly Republican period of its existence, and it isn't anymore. But deciding that now's the time to do something which is arguably the wrong thing to do, because another state did a wrong thing, is an interesting thing to analyze, again, not politically, but from game theory. And I don't know, John, because this is where you can help. You see things a little bit better than me sometimes, or differently. Um, if you go down this path for whatever reason that you think you need to do it, and because of the numbers in the state, you win, um, what could go wrong? And you have to ask yourself, um, do you really want the remaining Republicans in the state to just leave? I mean, do you think that'd be a good idea? Because I know, some people would like to think that's nothing but a bunch of MAGA people, but it's also an awful lot of business owners and an awful lot of entrepreneurs and an awful lot of people that the state might wish they still had someday, you know? Um,
Exactly. States that are purple, more in balance in terms of uh, the politics, have a real center that's really easy to find. And when you are a purple state, you compromise more. You have to learn how to find ways of getting legislation passed because you have to reach across the aisle. You have to do things differently. In states that have literally one party controlling the governor's office and one or both houses, and in some states there's only one house. And especially if there's a supermajority where literally everything can pass or everything can be veto proof, then you tend to see more extremism in your legislation, in your rulemaking by the regulators, and so on. And there's little that can be done politically to undo that until you get a change, call it regime change, a change that upsets those supermajorities. And it doesn't matter which party it is. You can see the difference from state to state between states that are literally dominated by one party, and especially ones that have been dominated like that for quite some time, as California and Illinois have been. Tennessee, example on the other side for Republicans, Idaho, another one. I mean, there's a hotbed of growing liberalism in Boise because of influx from Oregon and California, and long-term folks in Idaho would just wish they all went home.
yeah, yeah.
So that's kind of the first bit of backdrop. The second item is historical. We have always had gerrymandering. I mean, it comes from Governor Jerry and the salamander-like way that the state was, I think it was Massachusetts,
Mhm.
got carved up for congressional districts. It looked absurd. Well, if you look at some of the maps today, there's a couple in Illinois, one in Wisconsin that just sort of defy gravity. And this is what extreme gerrymandering can do. Now, look at California. We got tired of it. We got so tired of it that a substantial majority approved creating an independent redistricting commission that would figure out what our lines would be for congressional elections. And Peter Yao, an engineer and a longtime Claremont resident, was on that initial commission. In fact, he was interim chair in the early days. And what the public said is, we've had enough of the politics. We want fair districting. But over the years, what's happened is because of the supermajority in the state, the consultants that advise the independent commission are pretty heavily Democratic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if you look at how the last redistricting went, it went very much in favor of Democratic interests, the Democrats' interests. So you have all this as backdrop, which brings us back to, how does the public understand this coming up? Do they understand how misleading some of these ads are? And frankly, what I've seen on both sides of the equation are ads which I think are not particularly effective at putting to the public exactly what this is all about.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I know it doesn't sound like it's the same thing, but you imagine, you and your neighbor and the dog poop wars, where you two wrongs become three wrongs and four wrongs and five wrongs, and at the end of this process, all you got's a very messed up front yard, and nobody wins, right? I mean, that's the reality. So the ads are out there. People are going to be swayed to some extent, but it'll be party lines, and it's almost certain to pass because, again, the state's heavily Democratic. Um, what happens if it passes and the House stays Republican and Donald Trump's not going anywhere? Um, does it strike you that he's going to be amenable to sending lots more funding to things that are California related? I mean, I don't know. Does that sound like it's a good idea for anybody other than Gavin Newsom's national profile, which that's pretty obvious. But politically speaking, and you don't have to like what's going on, but you want to be part of what happens next. And what happens next is 3 more years of Donald Trump as president, and who knows what the House and the Senate are going to look like. Um, Seems awfully short-sighted to be another wrong in a two wrongs doesn't make a right situation. It goes against the interests of a big chunk of your population. Like you said, it was a constitutional decision on how we were going to do this and do it the right way. And whatever happened to leading by example and those sorts of things, I don't know. I don't know. It seems, game theoretically, it seems like it doesn't seem like very good leadership to me, right? I mean, if what you're trying to do is model good behavior, you don't do that very well by being a bad actor.
Yeah, so modeling good behavior is something that we would wish that all politicians of any stripe at any level would do for us. They're our elective representatives. And when they don't do that and we, the public, let them get away with it, we end up with the government we deserve. And as you say, that has consequences because there are still two parties. And increasingly policy within each party is made on very partisan grounds, oftentimes by the ones who are the most extreme within their parties, which means it's really hard on the center when you're not given, no
Yeah,
matter who brings it up, a very good choice to make,
yeah,
yay or nay. And if you are then purely tribal in your voting, which didn't used to be the case, particularly for those who are more moderate, more centrist, to say, I'm not necessarily going to vote a straight party ticket. I'm going to vote the candidate, and I'm going to look at the qualifications. I'm going to listen to their policy and position statements. I'm going to read the ballot initiatives and make an informed decision. Increasingly, it seems that that kind of informed citizen willing to put the work in to make good choices is drowned out by the sheer volume and the noise.
certainly in California. Yeah,
Certainly in California,
yeah.
but also true in some other states. Again,
Yeah,
Illinois comes to mind.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah, Florida, it looks increasingly that way.
yeah,
Ohio is still purplish, although it's been leaning Republican for much more strongly in the last 10 years.
yeah,
So I mean, you can go on a case by case, state by state basis. But let's bring it back to the to Granny. Two wrongs don't make a right. We did something right in this state in saying we don't want overt extreme gerrymandering. We don't think that's a good idea. And we kind of led the way for the nation and said an independent commission. And we're going to be fair about this. And we're going to balance the needs of constituent groups, including, minorities and any other group that can be identified within an area, so nobody is disenfranchised. And that's what an independent commission can do better than politicos can do.
Yep.
And we're going to risk taking it away with a ballot measure that purports to change the Constitution. I haven't heard the constitutional arguments yet about whether or not the way the ballot initiative is written, whether that's actually effective in affecting a constitutional amendment. And I think it needs a 2/3 vote to pass. I think.
But it's
I haven't gotten into the weeds yet.
Well, and again, every time I talk about the game theory book, it seems like the people I talk to talk in expressions, because being in the weeds is one of the ones in the book. But it is one where the devil is in the detail, and people do have to get into the detail on this and understand what it is they're voting for. This is not a good time to be tribal. It's really not.
Yeah, and it's, to be a good citizen means sometimes we have to set aside our differences and look for commonality.
Yep.
Look for the things that unite us, not divide us. What is in our best interest? A business person, usually figures out what's in his or her economic best interest, and can reach across the table and shake hands with somebody and make a deal. This is a similar kind of thing. We need to be responsible citizens.
Agreed.
And we have an opportunity to then express ourselves at the ballot box in a few short weeks from now. So any last thoughts, Jay, besides what I'm going to say? Ladies and gentlemen, you should read Jay's book and take it to heart and apply it to your business and in your personal lives, and maybe a poker game or two.
I'll take that. Useful game theory. I get my extra copies on Amazon. That's where you can get yours as well. And thank you very much, John. It's always wonderful to do things with you, and I look forward to seeing you on the radio show soon.
I'm sure we'll be on this week. It might be the John and Jay show again. It might be Lou. Who knows? But that's it for this edition of Professionals of the Inland Empire. So long for now. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for watching or listening to, depending on the case, the Professionals of the Inland Empire show with your host, John W. Tulac. If you have a suggestion for a guest, email him at jwtulac, that's JWTULAC @gmail.com. jwtulac @gmail.com.